My name is Jack. I am 32 years old. Exactly 6 months ago, the people who were supposed to love me the most committed a betrayal so calculated it changed my life forever. For 13 solid years, I built a high-stakes medical logistics company from the ground up, sacrificing my youth to turn it into a $4.8 million enterprise. And while I was sitting at a celebratory family dinner, believing we were there to toast a record-breaking quarter, my parents casually handed the entire company over to my lazy, golden child younger brother, Mason. They smiled under the warm light of the chandelier, and my father looked me dead in the eye and said I would now report to Mason because he had kids and deserved something secure. They humiliated me right there in the private dining room of a high-end Chicago steakhouse. But there is one crucial thing my family did not know. They thought they were taking a turnkey empire, completely unaware that the proprietary routing software keeping the whole thing alive belonged exclusively to me. And right now, their lawyers are frantically calling my phone while they face total financial ruin. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their illusion and rebuilt my own life, hit that like button if you believe that hard work should never be stolen, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let us go back to the night the illusion shattered. The private dining room at Gibson's felt suffocatingly warm. We were supposed to be celebrating. I had just closed a massive contract with a regional hospital network, securing our company's revenue for the next 5 years. I wore my good suit, the one I bought after we crossed the $2 million valuation mark. Across the table sat my mother, Eleanor, sipping her wine with that practiced, serene smile she used at HOA meetings. Next to her was my father, Richard, a man who always believed volume and intimidation were substitutes for actual leadership. And then there was Mason, my younger brother, 29 years old, impeccably dressed, and possessing the kind of unearned confidence that only comes from a lifetime of being bailed out. The waiter cleared our plates, and a heavy silence fell over the table. My mother reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, navy blue leather folder. She slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped right in front of Mason. I watched his hand drop onto it, his fingers tracing the gold-embossed seal of our company. I looked at my mother, expecting an explanation. She met my gaze with chilling calmness. She told me I had carried the burden long enough. She said it was time my brother had stability. She spoke as if she were relieving me of a chore, rather than stripping me of my life's work. It felt like I was attending a funeral for my own loyalty. Before I could even process the audacity of her statement, my father leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. He used his booming, authoritative voice, the one he used to scare contractors. He told me I would stay on, of course. He said I would work under Mason now, as his VP of operations. He justified it by saying Mason needed to build a college fund for his toddlers, that he deserved a substantial salary and the title of CEO. My father actually called it a promotion for the family legacy. I sat there perfectly still. I looked at the transfer papers peeking out of the folder. I looked at Mason, who did not have the decency to look guilty. He just offered a tight, patronizing smile. He was ready to accept 13 years of my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights as his birthright, treating my business like a guaranteed inheritance. Every fiber of my being wanted to flip the table. I wanted to scream until the crystal glasses shattered. I wanted to list every missed holiday, every canceled date, every freezing night I spent routing trucks while Mason was out wrecking cars and racking up credit card debt. But I did not. In that sterile, quiet room, a sudden, absolute clarity washed over me. Arguing with people who have already rationalized your destruction is a waste of breath. So I did the one thing they did not expect. I laughed, just a short, sharp chuckle. I nodded my head, looked right at Mason, and stood up. I pushed my chair in very carefully, making sure it was perfectly aligned with the table. I told them to enjoy their dessert. Then, I turned around and walked out of the restaurant. The Chicago wind hit me like a physical blow the second I stepped onto Rush Street. It was below freezing, but I did not button my overcoat. I needed the shock of the cold air to remind me I was still breathing. I walked for 2 miles, my mind racing through the sheer logistics of the betrayal. I ended up at a 24-hour diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and waitresses who do not ask why a man in an expensive suit is sitting alone in a vinyl booth at midnight. I ordered a black coffee and pulled out my phone. I dialed the only person I trusted, Marcus. He was a retired logistics veteran who had mentored me in the early days. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything. I told him about the folder, the college fund excuse, and the fact that my parents had successfully maneuvered the corporate structure to vote me out of my own executive chair. Marcus listened to the entire story without interrupting. When I finally stopped talking, the silence on the line stretched out for a full minute. Then, he asked me a question that changed the trajectory of my entire life. He asked me what I actually wanted to do, not what my family expected me to do, not what I thought I had to do to keep the peace. He asked me what Jack wanted. I looked at my reflection in the dark diner window. I realized I was done being the family engine. I wanted my own name on the door. I wanted a fortress built so tight that no family member could ever vote me out of it again. I told Marcus I was going to let them have the shell of the company, but I was taking the spine. He chuckled, a low, gravelly sound, and told me to get to work. I paid for my coffee, stepped back out into the freezing night, and realized the nightmare was not happening to me. It was about to happen to them. Walking back to my apartment, every step felt heavy with the weight of the last 13 years. You see, the medical logistics industry is not just about moving boxes. It is about maintaining a strict, unbroken cold chain for vital supplies. Blood plasma, oncology medications, highly sensitive vaccines. If the temperature drops or spikes by a single degree, the entire shipment is destroyed, and the resulting lawsuit could bankrupt you. I built our compliance protocols from scratch. I remembered being 24 years old, driving a refrigerated box truck through a blizzard in Wisconsin on Thanksgiving Eve because our main driver had quit. The heater in the cab was broken. I drove for 9 hours with an emergency blanket wrapped around my shoulders to ensure a pediatric hospital got their shipment. That same Thanksgiving, Mason was in Cancun, maxing out my mother's credit card on jet skis and bottle service. She paid his bill without a word, calling it a necessary expense for his mental health. When I was 26, I coded the initial version of our automated routing software because we could not afford the enterprise solutions on the market. It was a crude program at first, but over the years, I refined it into a highly sophisticated algorithm that predicted weather delays, optimized fuel consumption, and managed the chain of custody protocols automatically. It was the invisible heart of the business. And because I was naive and because they were my family, I never charged the company licensing fees. I just installed it on the servers and let it run. I walked into my dark apartment at 2 a.m. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I went straight to my home office, booted up my main workstation, and cracked my knuckles. The emotional shock had worn off, replaced by a cold, methodical discipline. If my father wanted Mason to be the CEO, then Mason was going to get exactly what a CEO gets on day one: a desk, a title, and a terrifying amount of liability. I logged into the company's master server. My first move was completely legal and absolutely devastating. The proprietary routing software, which I had named Sentinel, was registered under my personal LLC, not the family corporate entity. I had done that years ago on the advice of a lawyer friend, never thinking I would actually need the protection. I initiated a remote uninstallation protocol. I watched the progress bar fill up on my screen, line by line, as the customized code erased itself from the company hardware. I replaced it with the basic, off-the-shelf logistics tracking software we had used a decade ago, the kind that requires manual data entry for every single truck. Next, I opened the cloud drives. I spent 3 hours meticulously separating my personal intellectual property from the company files. I deleted my custom emergency response templates. I wiped my saved vendor negotiation scripts. I removed the automated billing macros I had built on my own time. I was incredibly careful not to delete any active client data, financial records, or operational manifests. That would be sabotage. I was not a saboteur. I was simply a man packing up his own tools and leaving the job site. I revoked all the convenient, backdoor access points I had set up for myself over the years to fix midnight emergencies. If a truck broke down at 3 a.m. now, the automated alert would not go to my phone. It would go straight to the newly minted CEO. By 5:30 a.m., the sun was starting to rise over Lake Michigan. My screen showed a clean break. The family business still had its trucks, its building, its line of credit, and its glossy marketing brochures. But it no longer had the brain that made it profitable. I closed my laptop and went to the kitchen to brew the strongest pot of coffee I could handle. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. I wrote Vanguard Response Logistics at the top of the page. It sounded solid, unshakable. I spent the next 4 hours drafting the operational framework for my new life. I registered the domain name. I filed the expedited articles of incorporation online. I transferred personal funds to open a new business checking account. My phone started buzzing around 9 a.m. The screen lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring. A few minutes later, a text from my father came through. It told me to stop being dramatic and get to the office by noon to brief Mason on the quarterly projections. I blocked both of their numbers. Then I blocked Mason. I removed myself from the family group chats. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had heard in over a decade. Around lunchtime, I drafted an email. I did not send a mass blast to my entire contact list. That reeks of desperation and spite. Instead, I carefully selected 5 people. 5 high-level directors at our most vital client accounts. These were people who knew my work ethic, people who called my personal cell phone when things went wrong because they knew I never dropped the ball. The email was short and entirely professional. I informed them that I had stepped down from my previous role to launch Vanguard Response Logistics, an independent firm specializing in high-risk medical transport and emergency continuity planning. I stated that I was available for specialized advisory work and left my new contact information. I did not mention my family. I did not mention the betrayal. Real professionals do not air their dirty laundry in the lobby. I hit send on all 5 emails. I sat back in my chair, staring at the empty outbox. The adrenaline was starting to fade, and the sheer terror of what I had just done began to creep in. I had no guaranteed income. I had no fleet. I had burned the bridge to my entire family, and I was about to go head-to-head in a cutthroat industry with a company that had millions of dollars in backing. But as I looked at the blank legal pad on my desk, the fear morphed into something else. Hunger. For 13 years, I had built a fortune to buy my parents' approval, only to watch them hand it to a man who could not even read a balance sheet. I was never going to make that mistake again. I was going to build an empire, and the bricks would be cemented with cold, hard boundaries. I went to sleep that afternoon knowing the storm was coming, but for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the lightning. The first month of Vanguard Response Logistics was a grueling exercise in humility. There is a massive difference between running a well-oiled, multi-million-dollar machine and sitting in the driver's seat of a parked car, using your phone as a hotspot to hunt for commercial real estate leases you can barely afford. I needed operating capital. I had healthy personal savings, but logistics requires massive upfront insurance policies and surety bonds. I set up a meeting with Mr. Henderson, a senior loan officer at a mid-sized commercial bank who had previously approved a massive equipment loan for the family business. I walked into his plush office expecting a professional courtesy. I handed him my business plan, which was bulletproof. Mr. Henderson scanned the documents, steepled his fingers, and gave me a look of deep, practiced sympathy. He told me the numbers looked great, but he could not approve the line of credit. He explained that my previous success was heavily tied to the established corporate structure of my family's brand. He actually had the nerve to suggest that without my father's signature as a guarantor, the risk profile was simply too high for a solo founder. I kept my face completely neutral. I thanked him for his time, took my portfolio back, and walked out of the bank. The rejection stung, but it also clarified the battlefield. The business world still viewed me as the son of a successful family, not the architect of that success. I had to prove the market wrong, one contract at a time. I spent my days in coffee shops, drafting process maps, and reaching out to independent carriers to build a shadow network of reliable drivers. I ate cheap sandwiches over my keyboard and slept maybe 4 hours a night. It was exhausting, but it was a clean exhaustion. Nobody was yelling at me. Nobody was taking credit for my spreadsheets. The breakthrough happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the dinner at Gibson's. My phone rang. It was Sarah, the director of procurement for a massive regional oncology network. She was one of the 5 people I had emailed on day 1. Her voice was tight with panic. She told me they had a critical issue. A dedicated refrigerated transport carrying experimental immunotherapy drugs had been stalled at a way station for 6 hours. The automated alerts from my old company were failing. When Sarah finally got someone on the phone over there, it was a junior dispatcher who had no idea how to reroute the truck or secure a backup refrigeration unit. The temperature logs were dangerously close to the failure threshold. "Jack," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "I know you left, but I also know you are the only one over there who actually fixed things. I need you to save this shipment. Can Vanguard handle an emergency recovery?" I did not hesitate. I quoted her a premium emergency response rate, which she approved instantly. I hung up the phone and went to work. This was my element. I tapped into the network of independent drivers I had been building. Within 20 minutes, I located a certified cold chain Sprinter van less than 10 miles from the stalled truck. I negotiated the spot rate, dispatched the driver, and coordinated the secure transfer of the medication payload alongside State Highway Patrol to ensure the chain of custody remained unbroken. I monitored the temperature telemetry on my laptop until the drugs were safely delivered to the oncology clinic. 4 hours later, I documented every step of the recovery in a flawless post-incident report and sent it to Sarah. Her reply came back 5 minutes later. "Invoice approved. We need to talk about moving our entire continuity contract to Vanguard. Are you free tomorrow?" I stared at the screen, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding for almost a month. That was it. The first major crack in the family empire, and the foundation stone of mine. That night, as I was closing my laptop, curiosity got the better of me. I opened a burner social media account and looked up Mason's public profile. I knew I shouldn't have, but human nature is a stubborn thing. There it was. A brand new photo posted just hours earlier. Mason was standing in front of the company headquarters, leaning against the hood of a brand new, jet black Porsche 911. He was wearing designer sunglasses and holding a cup of artisan coffee. The caption read, "Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Treating myself to a little CEO gift to celebrate the new era of leadership. #grindset, #family legacy, #blessed." I stared at the gleaming paint of that Porsche, and I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I knew the company's margins intimately. We ran a tight ship because medical transport insurance premiums are astronomical. We needed cash reserves for fleet maintenance, not luxury sports cars. Mason had used the company treasury, the money I had bled for, to buy himself a toy to look important on the internet. While I was out here working from the front seat of a Honda Accord to save a shipment of cancer drugs that his incompetence nearly destroyed, he was playing a billionaire playboy with my money. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was staggering. But as I looked closer at the photo, at the pristine tires of the Porsche and the smug smile on his face, the anger evaporated. It was replaced by a deep, dark amusement. Mason had no idea that he was not driving a trophy. He was driving a ticking time bomb, because the very same day he bought that car, he had proven to our biggest client that he could not keep their patients safe. The storm had finally breached the harbor, and they were completely asleep at the wheel. The momentum following the oncology contract was swift and undeniable. Business is a lot like water. It naturally flows away from resistance and towards competence. Within 6 weeks, Vanguard Response Logistics moved out of my car and into a modest, aggressively functional office suite in the industrial district. I bought used desks, set up high-speed servers, and hired 2 hungry, brilliant logistics coordinators who were tired of corporate bureaucracy. It was during this growth phase that I met Evan Parker. Evan was a legend in healthcare compliance, a guy who had spent 15 years auditing supply chains for federal regulators. He had a reputation for being ruthless, pragmatic, and entirely immune to corporate nonsense. He reached out to me on LinkedIn, noting that he had heard rumors about a major shakeup at my old company and was curious about the new player in town. We met for lunch at a loud, unpretentious deli. I laid out my vision for Vanguard. I did not sugarcoat the split with my family, but I kept it strictly about operational differences. Evan listened, eating a pastrami sandwich with methodical precision. When I finished, he wiped his mouth, looked at me and said, "I know exactly what happened over there, Jack. You were the load-bearing wall. They pulled you out and expected the roof to stay up because it had a nice coat of paint." Evan joined Vanguard as my chief strategy officer the following week. With his federal compliance background and my operational architecture, we started landing contracts that previously would have taken me years to touch. We were building a fortress. But while the walls of Vanguard were rising, the crumbling of my family's empire began to echo across the industry. It started with small things. Suppliers demanding cash on delivery instead of the standard net 30 terms. Whispers at industry conferences about missed compliance audits. Then the personal intrusions began. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister and the family's chief gossip coordinator, managed to bypass my block numbers by calling my new office line under the guise of a prospective client. When my coordinator transferred the call, I heard her syrupy, manipulative voice instantly. "Jack, honey, it is so good to hear your voice," she crooned, entirely ignoring the fact that I had cut contact. "Your mother is just sick with worry. You know Mason is trying his best, but the market is so tough right now. It is really hurting your father's heart to see you abandon your own flesh and blood over a little misunderstanding." I gripped the edge of my desk. A year ago, that kind of guilt trip would have sent me into a spiral of obligation. I would have drafted an apology text. I would have offered to consult for free. "Aunt Susan," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "there is no misunderstanding. They made a business decision at dinner, and I made a business decision the morning after. If Mason is struggling with the market, I suggest he sell his Porsche to cover operating expenses. Do not call this line again." I hung up the phone and instructed my team to screen all calls from anyone sharing my last name. The real breaking point, however, arrived 2 days later. It walked right through the front door of my office in the form of David. David had been the senior dispatch manager at my old company for 8 years. He was a stoic, hardworking guy who lived and breathed fleet logistics. Seeing him standing in my reception area, looking exhausted and holding a thick manila envelope, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I brought him into my office and closed the door. David sat heavily in the guest chair. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "I quit this morning, Jack," he said, his voice ragged. "I cannot do it anymore. It is a madhouse over there. The custom routing software disappeared the day you left. Mason claimed it was a server glitch and forced us to transition to manual spreadsheets. We are losing hundreds of labor hours." I leaned back, keeping my face blank. "Manual entry leaves a lot of room for human error, David." "It's worse than that," David said, tossing the manila envelope onto my desk. "Mason is bleeding the cash reserves. You know Dr. Aris, the head of the regional blood bank?" I knew Dr. Aris very well. He was our most demanding, highest-paying client. He tolerated zero mistakes. Mason missed the preventative maintenance schedule on 3 of the primary refrigeration trucks, David continued, rubbing his face. "He said the fleet budget was frozen. He used the cash to make the down payment and prepay a year of insurance on that stupid sports car. 2 days ago, one of those trucks broke down on the interstate. The backup generator failed because it hadn't been serviced. We lost an entire shipment of rare blood types. The room went completely silent. Losing a blood shipment was not just a financial loss. It was a catastrophic failure of duty. Dr. Aris showed up at the office yesterday," David said, a grim smile touching his lips. "He bypassed security, walked straight into Mason's glass office, and screamed at him so loudly the entire floor heard it. He called him a fraud in a cheap suit. He terminated the contract on the spot. David tapped the envelope on my desk. I pulled the maintenance logs and the financial diversion records before I handed in my badge. I am not going down with a sinking ship. If you have a spot for me here, Jack, I will work twice as hard. But you need to know what is coming. They are weeks away from defaulting on the main credit line. I opened the envelope. The paper trail was damning. Proof of negligence. Proof of financial mismanagement. Mason had traded the integrity of a medical transport company for the aesthetics of a rich CEO. I looked up at David, extending my hand. Welcome to Vanguard, David. Your desk is right outside. As David left to get settled, I looked out the window of my office. The storm wasn't just coming anymore. It was directly overhead, and my family was standing in the middle of it, holding a lightning rod, wondering why the sky was turning black. They were about to learn that you cannot inherit competence, and the bill for their arrogance was finally due. The silence from my family lasted exactly 4 months and 12 days. During that time, Vanguard Response Logistics grew from a scrappy startup operating out of a cramped industrial suite into a formidable player in the Midwest medical transport sector. I was working 14-hour days, but the weight on my shoulders felt completely different. I was carrying my own ambition, not my family's unrealistic expectations. But while my walls were rising, the foundation of my father's empire was cracking loud enough for the entire industry to hear. You cannot hide a cash flow crisis in logistics. Word travels fast when you stop paying independent contractors on time. It travels even faster when your drivers start showing up to medical facilities with expired compliance certifications because the front office laid off the audit staff to save money. The illusion finally shattered on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my office reviewing a new contract when my desk phone rang. It was the direct line, the number I only gave to high-level vendors. I picked it up, expecting a warehouse manager. Instead, I heard the heavy, labored breathing of my father, Richard. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. He launched straight into a tirade, using that booming, aggressive tone he always relied on to bully subcontractors. He demanded to know exactly what I had done to the server before I left. He accused me of corporate sabotage. He screamed that the routing software was a catastrophic mess and that I had stolen company property. He actually threatened to hit me with a massive lawsuit if I did not immediately drive over there and fix their dispatch algorithms. I let him yell. I let him exhaust his lungs until he paused for breath. Then, I spoke to him with a voice so calm and devoid of emotion that it caught him completely off guard. I explained the basic principles of intellectual property law. I reminded him that the Sentinel software was registered to my personal LLC, a fact his own corporate attorneys had overlooked during their rushed, sloppy transfer of power. I told him I had simply removed my personal property from his building, just like taking my framed degrees off the wall. He sputtered. The volume dropped, replaced by a desperate, menacing growl. He told me I was destroying the family legacy. He said I was being selfish. I told him he was confusing selfishness with self-respect, and I hung up the phone. I did not block the number this time. I wanted to see how deep the desperation ran. I did not have to wait long. Less than 2 hours later, my cell phone rang. It was my mother, Eleanor. She used a completely different tactic. She deployed the soft, wounded tone she usually reserved for HOA meetings when she wanted sympathy from the neighbors. She called me her sweet boy. She asked if I was eating well. She tried to casually weave the conversation toward the business, framing the entire disaster as a minor misunderstanding that we could easily resolve over a nice family dinner. She told me Mason was under a lot of stress. She said he really needed a steady salary right now to keep his household running. She even had the audacity to suggest that my father was considering taking out a second mortgage on their prime real estate properties just to cover payroll because the banks were tightening their credit lines. She was trying to make me feel responsible for their impending financial ruin. She wanted me to swoop in, work my magic, and save the day, all while allowing Mason to keep the title and the corner office. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned white. I asked her one simple question. I asked her why Mason's salary was my responsibility. She stammered, falling back on her favorite excuse. She said he had a family to provide for, that he needed the college fund for his kids. I told her that a college fund is earned through hard work, not extracted from a brother's blood and sweat. I told her I was running my own company now and wished them the best of luck. I ended the call before she could start crying. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The very next afternoon, my receptionist buzzed my office. She sounded slightly confused. She said there was a man named Mason in the lobby insisting he had a scheduled appointment. I did not have anything on the books, but I knew exactly why he was there. I told her to send him in. When the heavy glass door of my office swung open, I almost did not recognize my own brother. The arrogant, slick CEO who had posed on the hood of a Porsche just a few months ago was completely gone. Mason looked hollowed out. His expensive suit was wrinkled. He had dark, heavy bags under his eyes, and his hands were physically trembling. He did not swagger into the room. He shuffled, looking around my sleek, bustling office with a mixture of awe and profound envy. He sat down in the guest chair without being asked. He stared at his expensive Italian leather shoes for a long time before he finally looked up at me. He tried to force a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. He attempted to put on a brave face, launching into a rehearsed corporate pitch. He started talking about synergies. He suggested that Vanguard and the family business should explore a strategic partnership. He actually used the word merger. He said he was willing to bring me back on as a co-CEO, an equal partner, so we could combine our resources and dominate the market together. I sat back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. I let the silence stretch out, letting the sheer absurdity of his proposal hang in the air. A merger. He wanted to merge his sinking ship, drowning in debt and bleeding clients, with my profitable, rapidly expanding enterprise. He was trying to package a surrender as a business opportunity. I leaned forward and dismantled his proposition piece by piece. I laid out the exact financial reality of his company. I cited the lost contracts, the delayed vendor payments, the catastrophic failure with Dr. Eris and the blood bank. I told him I knew about the maintenance funds he diverted to buy his sports car. I stripped away every single lie, every corporate buzzword, until there was nothing left but the raw, ugly truth. His company was worthless. He had nothing to offer me. Mason's corporate facade crumbled instantly. He dropped his head into his hands, rubbing his temples violently. The bravado vanished, replaced by a raw, pathetic panic. He admitted everything. He said he had no idea how to run the logistics network. He confessed that the drivers hated him, the suppliers were threatening to cut them off, and the bank was threatening to call in the primary commercial loan. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and terrified. He begged me to help him. He said he would do anything. He promised to give me back my old office, to double my old salary, to give me total operational control. He just needed me to come back and fix the routing system before the bank auditors arrived the following week. He was asking me to rebuild the very machine he had proudly stolen from me. I looked at my younger brother, the golden child who had been handed the world on a silver platter, now sitting in my office begging for scraps. I felt absolutely no pity. I told him I had a condition. One single, non-negotiable condition if he wanted my help. Mason leaned forward eagerly, clutching the edge of my desk as if I were throwing him a life preserver in the middle of a hurricane. He nodded rapidly, promising he would agree to anything. He offered equity, he offered a formal public apology at the next family Thanksgiving. He offered to let me fire whoever I wanted. I shook my head slowly. I told him I did not want equity in a dying company. I did not want a seat at a toxic family dinner table. My condition was entirely different. I demanded a public confession. I told Mason he had to record a video, unedited and unfiltered, and post it to his professional LinkedIn page and the main landing page of the company website. In this video, he had to clearly and directly state that the leadership transition was a massive mistake. He had to admit that he lacked the operational expertise to run the logistics network. He had to explicitly confirm that I, Jack, was the sole architect of the business's success for the past 13 years, and that my departure was the direct cause of the current operational collapse. He had to apologize to his employees for his mismanagement and to his clients for jeopardizing their supply chains. Mason recoiled as if I had slapped him across the face. The color drained from his cheeks completely. He started shaking his head violently, stammering that he could not possibly do that. He said our father would disown him. He argued that it would destroy his professional reputation in the industry forever. He pleaded with me to be reasonable, asking if there was any other way. I pointed to the heavy glass door of my office. I told him that was his only other option. He could walk out that door, drive his pristine Porsche back to his empty executive suite, and wait for the bankruptcy lawyers to lock the building. The choice was entirely his. While Mason sat there, hyperventilating and paralyzed by indecision, my desk phone chimed. It was Liam, my corporate attorney. Liam was a sharp, meticulous lawyer who handled Vanguard's commercial contracts. I had asked him a few weeks prior to do a quiet, routine background check on the family corporate entity, just to ensure they could not drag my name into any of their impending legal disasters. I put the phone on speaker. I wanted Mason to hear whatever legal update Liam had for me. But what Liam delivered was not a routine update. It was a nuclear bomb that shattered the entire narrative of my family's betrayal. Liam's voice filled the room, crisp and strictly professional. He told me he had uncovered a massive web of hidden liabilities attached to Mason personally, liabilities that predated the dinner at Gibson's by several months. Liam revealed that Mason was currently embroiled in a vicious, highly classified divorce proceeding. His wife had filed the papers quietly after discovering a catastrophic financial secret. Mason had completely drained his children's college fund, maxed out joint credit cards, and secretly leveraged their home equity to fund a series of reckless, offshore cryptocurrency investments. The investments had evaporated. Mason was entirely wiped out and facing total financial ruin. But the real twist, the revelation that made my blood run freezing cold, was the timeline. During the custody and divorce mediation, Mason's wife had demanded total restitution of the stolen funds, or she would press criminal fraud charges against him. Mason was facing real prison time. He went to our parents crying for a bailout. But my parents did not have the liquid cash to cover a multimillion-dollar shortfall. Most of their wealth was tied up in illiquid real estate and long-term retirement accounts. So, they orchestrated a massive, calculated fraud involving my life's work. They did not give Mason the company because he deserved a promotion or because he needed stability. They transferred the CEO title to him so he could legally justify a massive, sudden spike in his executive salary. They needed him to have unhindered access to the corporate treasury. The entire dinner, the transfer papers, my father's booming justification about the family legacy. It was all a desperate, highly coordinated theatrical performance to turn my profitable company into a personal piggy bank to save Mason from a divorce settlement and a potential prison sentence. They sacrificed 13 years of my grueling labor to bail out their golden child's criminal negligence. I hit the mute button on the phone. The silence in the office was absolute. The air felt heavy, toxic. I slowly turned my gaze from the phone to Mason. He was trembling uncontrollably now. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route that did not exist. He knew the secret was out. The grand illusion of the capable younger brother stepping up to lead the family was dead, replaced by the ugly reality of a desperate thief stealing his brother's fortune to cover his own crimes. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not anger. The anger had burned out months ago. It was absolute crystalline clarity. Every lingering shred of guilt, every tiny voice in the back of my head that wondered if I had been too harsh on my family, vanished entirely. They had looked me in the eye over a steak dinner and handed my future to a gambler to pay off his debts. I leaned across the desk, closing the distance between us. I kept my voice terrifyingly calm. I told Mason that the deal had just changed. I told him I would not help him fix the software. I would not save the company. The family business was going to die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But I still demanded the video. I told him that if he did not record and post that public confession within exactly 48 hours, I would instruct Liam to forward the entire dossier of his financial diversion, including the misuse of corporate maintenance funds, directly to the commercial fraud division of his primary lending bank. I promised him I would personally ensure the bank auditors saw exactly how he had used their line of credit to finance a sports car and pay off his secret divorce settlement. Mason broke. He put his head on my desk and began to sob. Deep, ugly, heaving sobs of a man who has finally hit the concrete at the bottom of a very long fall. He did not argue. He did not bargain. He just nodded his head against the polished wood of my desk, his tears leaving wet streaks on the surface. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. I told him his 48 hours started right now. He stumbled out of my office, a broken shell of a man, carrying the full weight of his own destruction. Exactly 47 hours later, my phone started exploding with notifications. Industry colleagues, former employees, and even a few direct competitors were tagging me in a post on LinkedIn. I opened the app and there it was. Mason had recorded the video sitting in the dark, wood-paneled boardroom of the family office. The lighting was harsh, illuminating the deep bags under his eyes and the sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. There was no teleprompter. He looked directly into the camera lens, looking entirely defeated, and read the exact script I had demanded. He confessed to the mishandling of the leadership transition. He admitted his complete lack of operational knowledge. His voice cracked as he explicitly stated that Jack was the sole reason the company had thrived for over a decade. He apologized to the dedicated drivers who were currently facing delayed paychecks, and he publicly begged the clients for forgiveness regarding the recent catastrophic failures in the cold chain. It was raw. It was humiliating. It was absolute, undeniable truth broadcasted to a professional network of thousands. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Within an hour, the video had hundreds of shares across the medical logistics sector. Dr. Aris, the powerful blood bank director, reshared the video with a single, scathing sentence commending my departure from a toxic structure. That endorsement was the final nail in the coffin. The bank auditors, already suspicious of the missed payments, descended on the family business the very next morning. When they discovered the diverted funds and the critical lack of operating capital, they immediately froze the commercial lines of credit. The company could not make payroll. By Friday afternoon, the remaining drivers walked off the job, abandoning the fleet in the parking lot. The social fallout for my parents was even worse. They had spent decades carefully cultivating an image of wealth and prestige in their upscale suburban community. They loved hosting lavish parties and holding court at the local country club. The LinkedIn video shattered that facade overnight. I heard through the grapevine that the atmosphere at their country club turned instantly icy. Friends who had eagerly attended their dinners suddenly stopped returning their calls. It was like a funeral for their social reputation. The whispers about Mason's impending divorce and the financial scandal became the main topic of conversation at every HOA meeting. My parents, who had always valued appearances over substance, were suddenly pariahs in their own kingdom. A week later, the family business officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The bank seized the fleet, the office building, and the pristine black Porsche. My mother tried to come to my apartment building. The concierge called up to my unit, saying a woman claiming to be my mother was in the lobby, demanding to speak with me. She was crying, telling the security guard that there had been a terrible mistake and that her family was falling apart. I told the concierge I did not know anyone by that name and instructed him to ask her to leave the premises. I watched from my balcony as she slowly walked back to her car, her shoulders slumped, finally realizing that the bridge she burned was the only way back to safety. They had gambled everything on the illusion of control, and they had lost spectacularly. The empire was gone, sold off in pieces to cover debts, leaving nothing behind but a cautionary tale about greed and favoritism. 6 months have passed since the bankruptcy auction. Today, Vanguard Response Logistics operates a massive fleet of state-of-the-art, climate-controlled vehicles across 5 states. We employ over 100 people, and our retention rate is the highest in the industry. Evan, my chief strategy officer, recently secured a massive federal contract that solidified our position as the premier emergency medical transport firm in the region. I gave myself the ultimate promotion. I went from being the unappreciated workhorse of a dysfunctional family to the sole owner of a thriving, respected enterprise. I built a corporate culture based on transparency, merit, and absolute accountability. Nobody gets a corner office because of their last name. You earn your seat at the table. Last week, I had a meeting downtown. As I was walking out of the client's high-rise, I stopped at the corner waiting for the crosswalk light. I looked down the avenue, and my eyes landed on the old brick building that used to house the family business. The heavy brass letters had been stripped from the brick facade, leaving pale, ghost-like outlines of the company name. The windows were dark. A faded lease sign hung in the front window. A year ago, looking at that building would have filled me with a deep, crushing sorrow. I would have mourned the loss of my youth, the late nights, the holidays missed. But standing on that corner, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering desire for revenge. The building was just an empty shell of brick and glass. The life, the value, the true power had never been in the building or the family name. It had always been inside me. I turned my collar up against the Chicago wind and walked away, heading back to my own headquarters. This journey taught me the hardest, most vital lesson a person can learn. We are conditioned by society to believe that family loyalty is absolute. We are told to endure disrespect, manipulation, and outright theft simply because the people holding the knife share our DNA. We are expected to set ourselves on fire to keep toxic people warm. But boundaries are not a sign of a lack of love. Boundaries are the ultimate expression of self-respect. Removing access to your energy, your talent, and your wealth from people who exploit you is not revenge. It is an act of profound self-preservation. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. My parents and my brother demanded my submission, and when I refused, they tried to take everything I had built. They failed because they did not understand that true success cannot be transferred in a leather folder at a steakhouse. True success is forged in discipline, integrity, and the courage to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I know it was a heavy one, but I hope it brings clarity to anyone out there who feels trapped by the expectations of the people around them. You have the right to own your life. You have the right to your own success. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace and future? Share your story in the comments below. Let us build a community of people who support setting healthy boundaries. And do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.